Yeah, video, why is the video on? No, it's not that camera.
But
This would be this
none of the
one.
mics.
I've tried all the, okay. That's big. That's, when I try to do the other video.
Okay. So we had some technical difficulties. I'm now going to call the September 18th, 2024 Town of Pownell Planning Board meeting to order. We have a quorum, so Bill, you won't need to vote tonight. First, let's go over the meeting minutes from August. As amended, does anyone have any changes? No. I move that we move to approve the meeting minutes from August as amended. All in favor? Do you just want to quickly say what you said about the Estabrooks? We weren't actually recording.
Yes, I spoke with Jenny, our current code enforcement officer, and she said that everything was complied with in terms of planning board standards, and that now it was strictly code enforcement, and the current responsibility is with the fire chief in the next phase of development. So it probably won't have to be on the agenda for next month.
Okay.
Unless a planning issue pops up.
Let's hold off on the checklist. Let's talk about the Litchfield subdivision and where we stand with that. If you don't mind going over that real quick for me, Tom.
I met with the applicant. They were extremely cooperative. We had a great conversation, went through the details of the next steps. I had recommended two changes. I brought that to the attention of the applicant. One was a simple efficiency thing that I think that we should do on all subdivision plans, actually all site plans, is to have a a county registry recording block. There'll be moments where we won't be able to get digital answers. Or if someone comes in, we've been having some issues with our server. And so it makes it sometimes complicated to be able to pull out records. Sometimes we'll go straight to the registry, pull it down. So this kind of gives us the digital way as well as having it on the hard copy. It was, let's see, where do we put that? It's right down in here.
Okay.
I apologize for the smallness of it. I have a larger format plan. If anybody on the board would like to see it. Just so the chair is able to see it and co-chair. It's right there. It's just an information block. It adds to efficiency. I've always put it on any plans that I've ever prepared. It's for the ease of town hall staff and also people that come in. Let's say it was a larger subdivision, they're looking to buy a tract or buy a piece of it, and they've got their references right there. So that's just an efficiency thing.
Sign these today, 2 copies. One for the registry deed. They will fill this out, registry deed?
Yes, yeah.
And then will
'Cause-
that plan come back to?
Yeah, the applicant's responsibility to get this recorded. They'll assign a book and page number and everything will be filled out. I don't know if this registry does it, they'll actually put a seal on it. And then that way we'll have an official copy. The registry will have official copy too.
So actually, both plans will leave our hands.
Yes, if the board likes this concept of mine of having sort of a double checks and balances, then we'll always sign 2 copies. One will be in the registry. Actually, most site plans should be recorded in the registry too. You know, I think it also helps people out who work a 5-day work week and not being able to gain access here on all Fridays. It gives them the registry. Conversely, if they're in town, don't want to go over to the registry, they've got a hard copy here. So that was the first change. The second change, in the general notes section, you'll see a new note, note number 5, the newly created lot 1-14.02.02 shall not be further subdivided. Right.
No, detail behind that, I can see that only 1 couldn't be subdivided. But those 2, if the code enforcement officer and the planning board could be, unless there's something on this.
It doesn't meet the dimensional guidelines. There's no room to put a driveway through.
Well, they put a private road in along the 50 or 60 foot right away along that. If they put a private road in, then they could actually.
The applicant can always come back, even though it's a notation that's approved. Let's say that there was a way of doing it. At this point in time, with the current dimensional criteria that we have, and where we assume the test pit will be and the subsurface system will be, it doesn't look possible to break it again.
But isn't that comment correct? Love to be moving on, or just the engineer and what is doing that. I mean, if the code enforcement officer and the planning board says you can put a 60 foot or 50 foot right away, whichever the number is, along that 120 foot line, which is exactly the reason I'm asking, actually, because that's exactly, I live in this exact situation. I already have a house, but where this new lot in the code London, and my house, the rest of my property looks like O2, and I have a 60 foot right away. And if they did the exact same thing, they could. So I see no reason why we should even put a comment there that says they can't, because in the future, let's say we're all gone and Ginny's gone. That could be confusing. Because it's incorrect.
There's always ways of being geometrically creative in order to expand any lot that's over 5 acres, but has enough dimensional criteria to meet the the length of road and the length of frontage. If the board is more comfortable not having that on there, then it would be strictly a code officer's decision, because it would not be reflected on the plan.
You can't, could I make a comment? My understanding would be that I mean, there's only 300 feet of frontage where you would need 300 for each additional lot, and my understanding is you can't get frontage from a new road,
You can from a private.
from a private road,
My road is.
right?
And Bill is 100% accurate on
I have a
that.
question.
Pardon me?
I have a question. Do the applicants care that it says that on it? If it requires us to then print off new things and not sign it tonight, would they rather us sign it tonight as is, or would they rather bring it back?
You want me to comment on that? When we met with Tom, he was the one that said it was like either required or would go smoother. I didn't really want that on there unless it was absolutely required. But we're here in town. I don't think we wait for another whole meeting. If we could white that out, or I would just let it go if it's gonna be more of a hassle. We started this last April, this process, so I don't know what to say about that. We did talk and I said, does it have to be on there? Because we don't know what the future holds. We're not gonna live forever. If our kids get it, we just want to leave options open. But at this point, I guess the answer is, I don't know if we could, we kind of like to finalize it tonight. So I don't know what to say about that.
Well, if we did sign something that we know is incorrect, so something should note that we're signing it for convenience, which is.
Parks road outside the parks,
Oh, okay.
right?
Yeah, you all could initial, all the voting members could initial it, a little bit unorthodox. The other thing is because you know that you're heading towards final approval, and the board might even be inclined to give preliminary and final this evening. It could just be a formality at the October meeting that they sign it with that off. If that's the vote of the board, that number 5 be deleted. They
have a
still,
question.
they still can go through the process of voting and all, so you can leave here knowing that a decision has been made. And then just the formality of the board's signatures at the next
I
meeting.
guess I have a question with that is, we're not gonna be here for the next meeting, and if there's actions that need to be taken here, like if we take it, get it stamped or record it. Our daughter's a nurse practitioner, she's very busy, I hate to ask her to do more stuff.
Sure.
So if it means that we have it on there, we have no plans right now of anything. If they have to go through the same process again to get it changed, or does that permanently say they can never do that? I guess is my question. If with that on there, I don't mind it going signed, and if we have to take it and do physical stuff while we're here, they have to just go through the planning process. If somebody in the future wants to,
Well, as
do
Bill just
something with
pointed
it?
out, it's always better to have it clear on the first time around rather than have to go through the process. Conversely, anyone can come back and make a change to any notations on any plan and request a waiver. You just did that with Estabrook's.
But tonight we could decide that we want to cross it out and signature it, and then it's on this document.
Absolutely. Now, first, I would advise the board, before you make your decision, the board needs to make a decision if the chair said that there might be a possibility of merging preliminary and final in the same evening. You need to make that as a vote decision of the planning board before you vote on this.
I would
Because of the,
support that.
Regarding, is it the end of the world? Now, the comment isn't left on there. My opinion is it wouldn't be the end of the world at all, because my lot actually used to say, 50 acres used to say unbuildable, which it was unbuildable because it hadn't gone through the code enforcement officer, hadn't had any test pits, hadn't gone through planning board, so, and now it doesn't say that. So it's not the end.
So Tom, I just want you to speak a little bit about, my inclination would be to, with with how simple of a project that this is, I would be inclined to make a vote on both the preliminary and the final stages of this project. But my understanding is that there may be some concerns about that from the town.
Our select board has informed me that they want the planning board to go through any and all subdivisions, whether they be amended, minors, majors, conservation subdivisions, through the 3 steps: conceptual and or sketch, preliminary, final. And I'm just reporting back what they have.
But I mean,
in-
I can understand, I think most people think of subdivision as you're taking a lot and break into multiple pieces. Taking one lot and break into one other piece, to me, does not seem like a huge ask of the town.
It is not a huge ask, and I think that the applicant's request, the board can make that decision. This is coming from the select board as a policy.
Yeah.
By state statute, you are the board that makes that final vote. And again, I think every subdivision is so situational. In this situation, it doesn't get much simpler. Or much easier. So from a planning perspective, if you were to ask me, do we have any net gain going to final, and are there going to be any changes? I can't see any changes at all.
I'm fine with moving forward on both tonight, if the.
It's a
rest
board
of the
decision.
Agreement.
Marcy, do you have
I
any?
agree, and I think it's not written in the ordinance that we have.
Right. I would just comment that I completely understand where the select board is coming from, in that we want to be consistent across the board. And I feel moving forward, we should always try to be as consistent as possible with every applicant. In this case, this is an amended subdivision. It's really just a single lot that wouldn't otherwise, other than the history, wouldn't otherwise have to come before us in the first place. So I feel I'm comfortable with moving forward with both the preliminary and the final approval. So the first step would be to,
To a vote. Motion and a vote.
so I would move that we approve the Litchfield subdivision. That we vote that excuse me, trying to think of the right words. Yes,
The preliminary and final plan process, and consider this the final plan.
why don't we vote on the preliminary and then pass that and then just vote? Would that mean that we would need to? Yeah, so that way we're at least going through the process. I move that we approve the preliminary plan for the Litchfield subdivision as submitted.
Number 5 states.
So let me change that. Let's,
You can do it subject to the deletion of, if the consensus of the board is to delete 5, subject to the deletion of. So you're approving it, it's subject to removing that, and then we'd basically scratch it out and board members would initially.
If the planning director is okay with removing number 5, I'm okay with removing number 5.
These are so situational, you know, there were board members who felt comfortable with that, and given it's so situational, the true test is getting the approval through the code officer. So if whoever is code officer reviews this and says, geez, Mr. Schmidt did something almost identical to this, and we're going to build a private road. We're going to put in the 300-foot of frontage and the adequate amount of drive. And because the length of this, it's such an elongated lot, geometrically, might be a possibility. The only advice I would offer to the applicants is to be very careful where you put your well and subsurface. Yeah, that's your critical piece, because you only got 305-ish feet to work with, so it would be strategic, should that ever happen at another generation, breaking off a piece of that, you want to strategically place the well and strategically place the subsurface system. So it doesn't happen to be in the exact area where you want to put the drive.
So I'm thinking maybe we should vote as a board to remove number 5 under general notes first. Does that make sense? I move that we remove item number 5 from the general notes on the Litchfield subdivision. All in favor? I move that we accept the Litchfield subdivision preliminary plan as amended by the board. All in favor? And so now, does anybody have any comments, any problems with approving this finally? I move that the board approve the final application of the Litchfield subdivision as amended by the board. All in favor? Okay. So are we signing anything? Yep.
Right, you can argue over these sides.
No, Todd.
The date today?
18th.
I'll call about what. How to get it. I'll call. you?
Yeah, but just bring it to the registry. I won't be in
To the
tomorrow.
registry.
Yeah, just bring it to the registry of deeds, and one of their clerks will take care of it from there. You'll leave one copy, and then they'll sign the book and page, and you bring that back to. If I name is great, if not, Marcia.
The registry is downstairs? Thank you very much. I really
Thank you
appreciate
guys
it.
a lot.
Take care.
Appreciate it, bye.
For your patience.
Okay, with that out of the way, let's go over the conservation subdivision checklist. Yeah,
Now, well, Cory,
I think now, our next step is, this convenience for the public. We'll burn some copies of it, pardon me, and then we'll, post them in our little pigeonholes there
okay.
for the first, conservation subdivision.
I think also, it's Devin, because there is a section of our website. It's for,
Is Devin still with the town? There's speculation that he wasn't. So we might be looking for another IT also. But I again, confirm it through Becky. I'm pretty sure that someone, I heard someone say that he took a full-time job.
well, send it to Becky to get posted.
Yes.
So that someone. Everywhere.
Incidentally, Marcia did a.
Yes.
Spot on job. It's really good. Well, that was to be, I believe, Devin. Yeah. So I don't know if they're looking for a replacement or not. And Becky was able to
Okay. And as far as new business, I was hoping that John was going to be here to represent the select board. But I think it makes sense to just at least start to have the conversation about the short-term rental ordinance. So Tom, if you'd like to just kind of go over what you have so far, and then we can just have a conversation without the input of the board, the select board.
Okay. John apologizes for not being able to attend because he was going to set select board's context for the reason for doing this. He had an emergency meeting out of town. So he asked me to synopsize some of his comments, and these are the following. Mr. Moore has said that part of the reason for creating this is to be fair and equitable in the way that all short-term rentals are treated. That's his first comment. There's also a concern about the possibility of code compliance. I've seen it happen too. This is a sidebar from myself, not from John, but I've been talking with other municipalities where to help in economic ways, people are renting out their attics. They're renting out their cellars, and in some cases, they're not adequate ingress or egress. In some cases, the windows are too small to exit from if there was only one way out of a burning building. So life safety is another driving force behind this because they're growing in popularity. And the third point was based on code compliance, that typically short-term rentals have some sort of code review. So those are the synopsized comments from the select board. Now, how did we get to this point that there's a draft ordinance before you? I was asked by the board, the the select board and the code enforcement officer, based on their perceived need to draft up an ordinance for the board's review. And because it would be a land use ordinance, it comes to you first. So I prepared this in what would be the normal preparation of an ordinance that would build clarity to, every time you write an ordinance, it has to be clear what you're doing. And so you have to define a purpose. In the case of short-term rentals, the two most popular are either it's hosted by a primary residence with the host there, or it's unhosted, okay, without the owner there. For some odd reason, Northern New England has a lot of short-term rentals. It's not just because of skiing and the coast, but vacation land. And there's just an abundance of people who have bought houses or complexes and don't live in them. And in these unhosted ones, here's a classic one that's down east. There was a developer from away who bought 1.5 miles of ocean frontage, built 15 homes, and bought another 5 existing homes and is not living in any of them. They're all rentals, and they're all summertime rentals. So that's part of the driving force. So in the construct of this draft ordinance, I speak to host and unhosted. And then any good ordinance will have to have some standards because it would have to comply with code. So there's some definition of code compliance so that it makes the job of the code enforcement officer fairly easy. A, B, C, D, E, and this is what you have to submit. And it speaks to some fairly basic things that you would say, well, most people would do this anyways, but smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, fire extinguishers. Reminded me to go out and test my fire extinguishers and get some new ones. And how you evacuate. If you have a large complex and there's only, you're on the 3rd floor and the only way out is jumping through the window if you can get through the window, or down those 2 flights of stairs, you need an evacuation plan. And then I went on to define rental agreements. One of the things that discoveries that I've been chatting with other municipal planners is that on the absentee ownership of the short-term rentals, if something goes astray, there's no point of contact. And so the addendum defines Tom's responsible to be there. If I'm not there, where are the keys to get in? Here's another classic example of a short-term rental. A group of my friends went to a concert out of state and they rented up a whole house. When they got to the house, they couldn't get in it because someone had changed the alarm system and the lock system, but didn't tell the people that were using it for that weekend. Thus, they couldn't get in. They had to rent a hotel, but they ended up calling the municipality. And so,
Do we have a definition of what a long-term rental is versus short-term?
well, in the case of this particular draft, the short term is 28 days or less. Okay. I'm not sure we could really create a long-term definition. Again, because it's a totally different type of arrangement where somebody, corporations sometimes will rent out a house for a half a year.
Do we have a long-term rental ordinance?
No,
So, yeah,
we have neither short-term or long-term rentals.
well, it's just I mean, it makes sense to have some kind of ordinance for a long-term rental in that if part of the piece is safety, and it's like, we want somebody who's renting for less than 28 days to have fire alarm, but we don't have a requirement for somebody who's renting longer than 28 days to have a fire alarm. But that can be another meeting, we discuss that. Just to clarify that I'm reading this right, but it looks like to me it's saying if it's unhosted, as in that the you know, the host does not live on site or in the abutting property, that they can only rent it out for no more than 28 days in the calendar year. But if the host is on site, they can rent it out, short-term rentals, like whenever, as much as they want. Is that accurate?
That needs further definition. Typically, it is longer when you add up cumulatively over the course of a full calendar year. If you did just the whole summer.
Yeah.
And you were renting it out on a weekly basis as a short-term rental, you'd see that you'd get to your 28 real quick. So, so those that are hosted and on site typically will go beyond that. Again, the purpose here is mostly to define, to be fair,
Yeah.
and to be fair also to those people who have homes that need that extra income. It gives a good supportive income and
No, I mean, I think what you have drafted up on first perusal makes sense. One thing that could be worth discussing is, I think this is saying hosted means that you need to be in the property, on the property or abutting property. And I can see the point of that, but is it worth discussing? What if somebody lives in Pownell, but they're not in the abutting property, but they're close enough that they could react to, or, you know, this idea of what's, if we're allowing a abutting property, you know, do we add more flexibility where, yeah, somebody lives in this town, their parents passed away and they want to do a short-term rental in their parents' house, but they're not in a abutting property? Do we let that type of situation have a little bit more flexibility, that as long as they live in town, they can adequately, they're close enough to respond to if there's an issue with their short-term rental versus just an abutting property or on the property?
Ryan, I think that flex is a great idea, and where it would typically be woven in would be in the addendum. The challenge in all ordinances is writing the perfect ordinance that applies to everything. And so there's a situation, if you will, somebody's inherited a house with something, it's in North Pownell, and we're living down here, okay? What do we do in that situation? We want to do a short-term rental. That can be built into the agreement addendum, which is a document that's here in town hall.
Yeah.
See, the town becomes very challenged because, particularly in terms of fire, you've got a very small fire department. You have a lot happening in town.
Yeah.
And you do have short-term rentals going on. And I think that was the driving, motivating force for the select board to try to create something fair. But John did stress, and he wanted me to stress, that it needs to be fair and equitable, both for the town as well as the other thing is, bear in mind that in the construct of these ordinances, the first cut is never the final cut. There's always embellishments, and we need to polish it up. But when I was asked by the select board to create it, I did. And the code officer also felt it was necessary, so.
Section D, rental agreement, but that would be a maximum number of tenants, yes. Well, that can be a problem sometimes where there are 20s, we might say, one bedroom place on Elmwood Road. Everybody meet there, there's gonna be 50 of us there. How do we determine how many guests? How do we write that into the ordinance?
You really can't. You can't write it in the ordinance, but you can put it in the, unless you wanted to put a max based on after the fire, say the fire chief inspected the building and said, well, maybe there shouldn't be a fraternity party here of 52 people. That happens too, that where a property is rented, it's on a 100-acre site with 15 rooms, and yeah, it's just gonna be Todd, Orion, and Tom gonna rent it, and it turns out to be a much bigger affair. So what we're trying to do here is to build clarity, but also to be fair, not to, we could list 10 pages of standards. That wouldn't make any sense. We have to be fair to the property owner too. Your two biggest challenges,
Yeah.
incidentally, fire and police.
Enforcement, I mean, I'm guessing, I mean, ideally, yeah, this is, enforcement is not putting a bunch of onerous on city staff in that it's, my guess is enforcement would be more if your neighbor notices that you're renting it out all the time, that they would bring it to the attention of code enforcement, or like, how do you
Well, see,
imagine?
that's a point well taken. If there is a undesirable situation occurs, and then who does the neighbor call? Let's say it's on the property next to yours, okay?
Yeah.
Who do you call on Friday afternoon?
Yeah.
You can't call the sheriff. Okay, or you could, but,
Yeah. Is it, yeah, well, if that's the case, is there a notice to abutters when you are signing up? If you're registering the short-term rental, you also let your abutters, like, I might not have I have my neighbor's phone number, but other people might not have their neighbor's phone number, that you would let, to make sure that your abutters know your contact info in case there is in the host, you know, if there is an issue, your neighbors can contact that person.
Well, I could speak a little bit to that because the former Airbnb host.
Yeah.
And if you look on the website, I'm still there, had guests this year. Probably not gonna be voting on anything, but I'm a wealth of information, both as a host and also as a user, and, I'll say a couple things. One is, the rental agreement would be what is in your Airbnb write-up, and that has a limit on guests, for example. So that would be, I guess, amended to the application. There's never really a notice to abutters, so it's up to the neighbors have cause for noise concerns or whatever. They're gonna call cops, probably.
Yeah.
But that feeds into the difference between owner occupied or unhosted, because then you're there, you know exactly what's going on, versus unhosted. And I think from what I've read, most of the problems with Airbnbs and VRBOs are unhosted, where the 50.
Well, that could be, and maybe that is a thing to add to the, if it's unhosted, that like you know, let the abutters know who your contact, like your contact information as a host if there is an issue, because they can't just knock on the door and complain.
And the third thing is, if you go to the Airbnb site, I mean, there's a tent on the Airbnb site in Powell. And there's maybe it's your tent.
No,
There's a tent, but there's a yurt, but then it comes to the question, there are, how close is it to be considered hosted? We all know various situations where there's an adjacent property that is, it's a standalone Airbnb, but it is part of the property.
so, well, with this ordinance, that if we have some of these fire requirements about a, you know, a fire alarm, would that then, would this ordinance then make it not possible for a year or a tent to be listed as an Airbnb thing because it cannot be up to code, basically?
It's a 10.
I don't know what the, yeah, yeah, it's true.
I'm wondering if maybe, Tom, what you did here is hugely helpful for us. I mean, incredibly helpful to just have somebody throw something down on paper for us to start with, all of us having been through a really onerous ordinance writing session. But I kind of want to, as a board, as somebody who's looking at this idea, coming from a place where I suppose I'm becoming more libertarian as I get older. And less is sometimes more. And that's why I asked you to speak on what the select board was thinking about, is because I'm interested to know why we need to add another ordinance to our ordinances. And so number one, that's my first thought. Number two, what exactly are we trying to achieve with the ordinance? And can we really make this as simple as possible? I personally don't see, and everything can potentially be a problem. And so I'm always looking at things from a risk benefit, cost benefit analysis. And so sure, there's definitely potential for problems with Airbnbs. And I'm wondering what the actual risk is. Number one. Number two, I'm concerned about enforcement, and just like Bill was asking about, what's the cost to the town for enforcement? How onerous is that gonna be? Who's actually gonna do it? Does every Airbnb, I mean, there's two, I think, in town. I looked, VRBOs and Airbnbs. I only saw two in Pownell yesterday, 5. So that's a relatively small number. And if at that, a small number, I suppose enforcement is not going to be too difficult, but that's going to be another role that the town is going to have to take on. Compliance and enforcement. That's where I always like to start. I mean, and it's not, and I'm not second guessing the select board. I'm posing the question. I would like to start there. Do we really feel as a planning board that it's necessary? And then what about it? Do we feel if it is necessary, what's really important that needs to go into the ordinance to meet why this ordinance would be necessary? Yeah, for sure.
I think this is a good conversation that the board's having, and planners should always look at, speaking about myself, what are the alternatives? There's 3. 1, do an ordinance, 2, do nothing, or 3, and that this is a select board driven idea, can also be created as a policy. And so the construct of the policy is a little bit less structural in this, but it gives that latitude to the select board. And should a situation arise, as long as there's a linkage to the code officer, and that it can be remedied. And I think that's the key thing. It's not to deprive anyone the opportunity to, in these economic times, to do short-term rentals. I think it's more the anticipated situation, which might be very rare, that happens. How do we fix it, given we don't have sheriff and we have limited fire protection?
So how would the ordinance say right now as written, say Bill's worst case scenario, you have a short-term rental that is continuing to be a rental after rental is continuing to be problematic for whatever the reason, noise, disruptions, parking. What would the town be able to do to rectify that?
To rectify that, you would need yet another component to assist the code officer. And the code officer would need a means for revocation and or suspension. So usually it's a 1, 2 strikes and 3 you're out. That's traditionally the fairest way of doing it, a warning, and then another big frat party. Next time, suspension of your ability.
And then, so,
I think that's the only fair way of.
right, so we're essentially by, the ordinance would provide essentially a permit to allow short-term rentals?
It'd be an application submitted the code officer would review to make sure that the standards are being met. In this case, because fire is such an important thing, the fire chief would go with the code officer and say, the smoke alarm, carbon monoxide alarm, evacuation plan, good, you're good to go. And then some sort of fee would be paid. That would be coming from the select board. It's probably part of their fee schedule. And it would be granted by the code enforcement officer. So it'd be procedural, very much like Bill's process when you went for your ADU. You went through the steps, you met with the code officer, you submitted all the information, and that was that. In this case, I think the key thing is, because the code officer will be pivotal in making the final decision, does the town want it to be a policy? If so, it should originate from the select board as part of their policies. And then if they feel, and you feel it should be an ordinance, then it lands here.
So explain to me the difference between a policy and an ordinance.
An ordinance is quite structural. You have state statute as your angels on both shoulders. You're empowered. You're the only board that's empowered to work with a land use ordinance. I'm not speaking to about appeals with boards of appeals. Whereas the select board policy thing, you should have John address, because sometimes policies can be baffling, depending on how they're constructed.
So would they be enforceable?
The select board's position, yes. They're different than land use ordinances, in my opinion. I always like to look at ordinances as being defensible. If we go to our attorney, she can defend our principles, our purpose, based on what's in the ordinance. A policy, unless it has a good construct, and again, this is just the beginnings of this contract. If it's a couple paragraphs, I think you have your answer. But I think John should probably be the person who addresses that, seeing he's the advisor to the planning board.
I mean, it sounds like they want this, what you're saying, the select board would like an ordinance, not just a policy, that's why they.
I've heard one of their members use both words.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, they're two different things.
I was just looking at the list of policies. Things like bar select board, so there's.
Okay.
So that could be a question, depending on where the board's consensus is. I think it's a conversation you need to have with the select board. Would you like to consider this as a policy? We can work with you on it. If it's an ordinance, then we've got from now until next June to refine this so it gets to town meeting. Whereas a policy, they don't need to go to town meeting.
Is this a solution looking for a problem, or are we trying to get ahead of
The latter.
trying to get ahead of
Assuming there is a problem.
That's
That's a huge assumption.
Yeah, I would agree.
In the Bronx, that's a
Yeah.
big problem.
And to be honest, my concern is not to be argumentative or to not do what the select board is requesting us to do. I have my personal hat. I'm putting on my planning board hat right now. And my concern would be, just as Bill had said, is this a solution looking for a problem? How much time is the planning board going to waste? Not necessarily waste, those are probably the wrong word. But how much time is it going to take for the planning board to go through and write this ordinance versus how much of a problem it really is? And having been through the process again of going through and writing an ordinance, it may seem simple, but we've just wasted, and not wasted, sorry, I keep using that word. We have taken quite a bit of time, 45 minutes or so, just talking about the idea of the ordinance, and there's still a ton of work that would be left to get done. So is there, number one, is there more pressing issue for the board? We talked about solar farms. To me, that might be a little bit more of a concern from an environmental impact, and we should, the risk, again, looking at a risk benefit analysis just quickly. The downside of a solar farm going south would be probably a little bit worse than the downside of a single Airbnb being problematic, and there's probably other ways outside the ordinance that we could manage that. That's my thought.
I think you make a valid point. I mean, well, the key piece to me of why this might be important is the safety aspect. But then that brings up the question, I mean, yeah, you could do a policy on the select board level, but if we're talking about safety, maybe there is a ordinance that relates to if you are renting out your property and making money on it, whether it's short-term or long-term, that there should be some, awareness of what's the fire risk, and things like that. I think that is a valid concern because yeah, people's houses do burn down, and if the fire people don't know that how many people are in this, unit and it's being rented out short-term or long-term, I think, I think that's I think that's concerning and worth discussing, like, from a safety standpoint.
That's a good point. Why just put it in short term and not long term?
When it comes to any policy or ordinance, it goes back to these 5 steps. What problem are we trying to solve? How well does it solve the problem? What problems does it cause? What are the costs? And in the end, is it worth it? So,
Yeah, that is good. Yeah.
unless we'd have to answer all that to see. So
It would just serve the pleasure of the select board, they insist.
Right. And so I think, I would like to know from them, are they insisting that we come up with an ordinance before we spend too much time on this? If,
I've been to my bias, but when you talk about the time involved, there's also the public hearing process.
Right.
And I think there would be a lot of comment there.
it would take up a lot of time. So, I'm wondering, Tom, and that's why I really wanted John and I to be here, but I understand that he couldn't. It happens to all of us. How would we communicate to the select board what our thoughts are at this point?
Well,
You want to be the middleman for that?
I think I'm gonna add this to my job description. I'll pick the messenger, that message, I'll deliver it for you. Don't put that in this. No, how do you word that? Yeah, I think it's better to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Eyeball to eyeball on this one.
Yeah. Table until he can be here and then we can talk. I think that's
Yeah.
a reasonable way to do it.
I will deliver a brief message that board invested a lot of time this evening, talked it through, looked at the ordinance, but would very much appreciate having a conversation with John to focus on whether or not this might work better as a policy. I would put that out there because I think he might entertain it. And then if not, then you know what the next step will be.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think it's important to do eyeball to eyeball and also to express the going to be a substantial time commitment. You know, I'm sure there'll be public input.
There will be, for sure. Okay, so let's table that until, maybe we'll put it on as old business for next month with the idea that the select board can have a representative here. Other business, planner update?
Because you've invested a lot of time in this, I'll try to see if I can give you a compressed version of this. Some of the recent things that I'm working on, I'm trying to ratchet up a way of retrofitting and refilling what I call Rosie's Red House for a sandwich shop and a bakery. As you're aware, the prior owner died, I think it was the middle of August. Rosalie Edwards. And I've been in communications with Larry. We've had some pretty deep conversations. So I'm going to continue my conversations with him with the hopes that we can put an appropriate use in there. And everyone I speak with said, geez, how great it would be to be able to grab a sandwich or a good bagel. You know,
It's funny, for years we had neat years, if you remember neat years. And then we, of course, we always had. We've been one and one. Support back then.
I've got a couple of different ideas, and I actually have a woman from Yarmouth who wants to sit down and talk with me about it. She already owns a substantial bakery. So it's another different hat that I wear. I try to do little economic development things that would be good for the common good of the community. Save me packing lunch.
Well, when Bradbury Gatlin expands.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right, yep,
Also, we're at 3 or 4 units over there on Maryland.
yeah, yep.
So I'm ratcheting up my efforts on that. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. If you have leads or anything like that, you know, pop me an email. I'll follow up on anything and everything because I think it's that important to have that element in the community. Speaking of economic development, there will be a new refresh economic development committee that will be formed. It'll just be 3 new members, and they'll be getting together with the old economic development committee. I believe if my memory is correct, on February 9th. So I'll be attending that meeting, and I'll be there to assist as it is. October 9th, but I think that too, if anyone wanted to attend it. Similar to Litchfield subdivision, there's 2 or 3 more that are out there that are quite similar to it. They're older subdivisions, and they're looking to break off a lot from a prior subdivision. The one that you can anticipate seeing if he gets his plans prepared in time to be Chad Merrill. It was a subdivision that we have them out there. Still one fairly serious person contemplating conservation subdivision. I don't think that the board will be seeing that. The other thing that I anticipate is going to be important, okay, how we build in some sort of affordability component without having to write a lengthy ordinance, so it satisfies state's needs. Have some legal challenges that are coming up. So I think we're somehow, you know, the state statute has to work for needs, which should be, this is also very something to bring it back to the boards, either at Trump or whatever. Won't be lengthy, you know, maybe a paragraph or a couple sentences and try to see how we can dovetail it into an existing ordinance to satisfy the state.
Is it about like the affordable density bonus thing or is that other stuff?
It's affordable density.
Yeah.
So there's state statute that speaks to affordable density, and what I'll do is I can just make you all a copy of that, and then we'll reference it as to how can we fulfill the state needs, and because we don't have a defined growth area, so it puts us in a little bit of an awkward situation with the. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. I'm trying to mill it through my head. How can we do that in a simplistic but effective and efficient way without creating a big lengthy ordinance? Because again, it's so situational. Affordable to me may not be affordable to anyone else.
With thinking about the water supply in this downtown area, I mean, my perception is, you know, we are thinking of that as being a potential growth area in the future, but we haven't designated it as such right now, right?
We're probably
I
2 steps
I
away.
was thinking that same thing.
2 steps away from that. Let's see. If there's any- Solar farms, at the risk of sounding biased, I would suggest caveat emptor. Be careful. Be extremely careful. And what I'm going to suggest to the board before we even think about an ordinance, I would like you to look at a U-Town of a solar farm project that is ongoing at this moment in the area that I live in. That 90 minutes, I think, will help you get a deep perception about solar farms. As I've said quite a few times, one of my big concerns is the decommissioning. We have a responsibility to the generations that follow us. And the traditional decommissioning of these is between 20 to 25 years. The landscape that these sit on, all of them sit on, is totally decimated. And to restore that back is a huge challenge. The bigger challenge is where do these decommissioned panels go? And depending on our relationship, in a worst case scenario, developer X holds before that 20, 25 years is up.
Common Commons, I suspect.
Letters of credit don't count anymore. Unless you've got several $1 million in the bank, and even that probably won't decommission a large solar farm.
Now, are we at more risk since we don't?
Well, it can be very easily defined in land uses that are permitted or prohibited. And I know of no reason why a community, if it chose to prohibit them except for individual cases, homes, small businesses. But the solar farms, the environmental impact, ecological impact, and the landscape impact for future generations is something you need to look at really carefully. I think one thing that would be very helpful, one of the largest solar farm developers ended up being, unfortunately, in our community that I live in. And I'd like you to watch the YouTube. And
What is
then
it?
I'll send.
Okay, you send it to
on
us.
you. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
There is.
Because it's recent too.
I know some businesses, they're required to basically take out an insurance policy that would cover cleanup or, but yeah, it's.
Insurance policies.
Yeah.
So what do they,
You have been done away with those.
yeah, so it's, insurance companies fold, companies merge, insurance companies more and more, even hospitals more and more are owned by country folk. So there's some real challenges that are out there, and I think you've got such an incredibly beautiful community. Just be very thoughtful about.
So rather than an ordinance, would it be writing a couple sentences in our existing ordinance, say, solar arrays are limited to 36 panels?
You should say a certain number of panels, or, because again, it becomes situational. Let's say at some point, the village plan develops and there's a dozen townhouses on 20 acres, and there's room to put solar panels. My conviction is that solar panels aren't the answer. Hydrogen cells are, and they're about the size of $50. So, this is just the current energy alternative. There's more that are out there that are going to be obvious in the next couple of years. So it's to the town's advantage to begin to look at what are those alternatives, what type of spatial relationship do they have to the community. In Sanford, where I live, we're now almost the nation's largest municipal solar park in the entire nation. And you stop to think about that, what goes on in Phoenix and in the desert and all other places. But this recent one was in a very wooded area. It's probably a mile from my home, and I can't see it from the valley I live in, but it totally decimated the hill.
I would like to see us task.
Yeah, at some time, and you all have a lot of responsibilities. Sometimes it's, it's good to do a field trip now and then, and just to kind of see what another community has done that you really like, or makes you feel uncomfortable. There's nothing like the visual. Now you'll be able to Google this site after I send you the YouTube. I just didn't want to burden you with it, or I needed your permission to send it off to you, but to take a look, I would encourage you to look at it, okay? That 90 minutes might help you decide what direction you want to go. I do not, if you ask me my recommendation, I would say not to create a solar farm ordinance, okay? It will encourage one.
So as it stands, because it's, right now, it's not an accepted use, a solar farm would need to come before us for a change of use. And so, we don't necessarily need to allow that
Yeah, because you have no standards.
because we have no standards.
Would almost have it.
Yeah, that was before my time. Yeah, right.
And that's what I thought. You are clearing land anyway. For a corridor like the transmission line, that seems like the perfect place to put it because you already have to have this area cleared, but yeah.
Okay.
So, no ordinance, but perhaps language.
Like, again, I would encourage you to kind of do it incrementally. Visit a couple fairly large scale ones. Watch this YouTube I send you. Because it's current, it's ongoing right now. So it's good to look at something that didn't happen 10 years ago. Okay, when people got all excited and that's where Sanford got all excited. at our municipal airport, it's revenue generating for the municipality. So they get revenue from the developer because the land is only leased to them. So we lease virtually the whole airport, that doesn't have runway on it. And, it's huge.
See some, definitely some future impacts, like my solar panels, I got F-24, and I put them up like 4 or 5 years ago, and they've been fantastic, but they're already very obsolete. So if I put up a whole, let's say 5,000 of them as a commercial install, suddenly those panels, it's actually, there's a cost benefit, there's a benefit. We actually rip out all those 300-watt panels, and put them 600-watt. They're the same size because they become much more efficient. So I could see some problems down the road for commercial solar farms, just because the solar panels good for 25 years or more, but they actually aren't really as profitable after 5 years. It's cheaper to rip them out, throw them away, and then put new ones in. The government will probably pay them to do it.
10 years from now, we'll be, seeing hydrogen cells.
Hydrogen cells, is that for battery storage? Is that?
Outside of that, is they would do nothing, waiting for whatever technology or car is. Be ready.
I think it's fantastic for housing myself. With 24 panels, you have no electric.
I think again, for residential applications and even some small commercial applications, makes a ton of sense.
Or even if we did get the future facilities, I mean, huge roof, I mean, it's provide all the power for that facility and this, you certainly do. Just love the move.
Well, thanks was that it,
Yes, I think that gives a good wrap up
Yep.
of some of the things that we're.
okay.
Sorry, I took so much.
No, that's perfectly fine. Marcia, we have
Three things.
yeah, I'll let you take over.
I could attend by Zoom. I'd like to stay on with the work. I think I could still do all the secretarial work except one. And I think you guys would like me to, you should do that.
Absolutely.
So, I'm going to plan to tell.
You're doing the petting.
Took it with Arizona, when it was.
Yeah,
Is there a way we can?
yeah. No, I was actually, I wanted to thank you for all the work that you do as a secretary. It's huge for all of us. So whatever we can do to keep you on, I think we should try and do. I don't know how, I think with this new setup, I think with this new setup that we could, what I would be hesitant of is, I think meeting in person is really, really important. And I don't want Zoom to be, as much as I'd like to be sitting on my back deck talking to you guys for the planning board, I do think in person, this is the default, and everybody who is not in, 3,000 miles away should be here. But I would think, coming from that understanding that Zoom is not a luxury, it's out of necessity. And in your case, if we could make that happen, I think we should try and see if we can't do that.
Have Zoom, then you have to. That would be the downside.
That would be the downside,
I mean,
right?
it may be that I can send comments.
Okay.
So there's a Zoom, we have a Zoom meeting. But if there's a meeting to be held by Zoom, then you can post the link on the website. Anyone can attend the Zoom meeting. But I think it's based on some.
Yeah. Is that much of a problem for us that we would foresee?
I don't
for
think it's a
3
big deal.
meetings, 4 meetings? Is that what we're talking about, Marcia?
Yes.
Yeah. 3 meetings.
When are you departing? So the October, November, December.
Yeah, later.
Is it Patagonia?
Oh, that was last year.
I think there's still Patagonia, Arizona.
There is, yeah, we're not that far from
Yes.
Patagonia.
Okay.
So that said, moving on, we received a request for a FEMA ordinance revision that is optional. Most of it has to do with coastal flood zones, which doesn't apply. It also, because of the shortage of coastal engineers, non-engineers, but professionals to review coastal zone flood issues. And so the only part that we might consider enacting is that they're added a clause basically refers to any updates would be incorporated into the existing. I wasn't completely clear on it. My recommendation would be that it's optional. Not large. The bulk of it.
I would agree. Just opt out. This is 99.9% pertaining to the coast. And then if there are any amendments or modifications we have to make, national FEMA contact the state and the state will contact. So run an instant email list if there's anything that would.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the third thing is, I did receive a Freedom of Information Act for any planning for records, cannabis, manufacturing, and extra books, and did a search of all email documents and provided Betty with all the correspondence from VHS, as well as the file that had. So, I did that.
And I think that would just be a reminder to all of us that what we say as a board can be.
Was there any discussion of cannabis in Estabrooks? I don't recall it being
No.
discussed.
But, yeah, but I think that it has more to do with agriculture. Because I had to search for manufacturing. So I think it has to do with the process. That Estabrook as a agriculture.
Okay.
I'm guessing that's the reason.
Yep, got it. Right.
Maybe that's a good reason to revisit the thing we've been talking about for a while of kind of like, we had some confusion over a greenhouse being agriculture and us having no say in it versus, I mean, I think it's worth having some legal or statute or ordinance clarification that we can, discuss and raise concerns over a building, be it a greenhouse or not, that's above a certain size.
The communication didn't.
Interesting.
Just one little footnote. The person requesting the FOAA is also contemplating a petition to drive a land use ordinance, more commonly referred to as a cannabis manufacturing facility ordinance that would have those performance standards that you speak of, Ryan. But we have to do everything sequentially. So the sequence that's in order right now is if he does pursue, he'll pursue vis-a-vis petition versus us preparing cannabis manufacturing facility ordinance. Now, several months ago, a member of the select board suggested that, I be prepared to write. So I'm prepared, and actually, I'm happy to report to the board, here in a very good way, because I have what I think is the best model state recent. And so, it would be a great time saver. It's chock full of performance standards, and it's also prepared by attorneys that we're familiar with. So it can be very expensive when you get into that type of endeavor. I always have to look at, we do this cost efficiently, but also do it very effectively, so our code officer can enforce it. So if it gets to that bridge, I'll keep you posted. I think the most important thing is to find out if the petition, because it won't be a select board initiated request to do the ordinance. It would be a petition request.
Okay.
Okay. That's where that's.
Agenda for next month? So if that's it, I would just leave that. We don't have anything upcoming as far as applications go.
The possibility of Chad and Merrill of the public subdivision amendment. But today was the deadline to submit plans, and I told him if he got the surveyor to put one together, just bring it up tonight, and I'd have plenty of time to review it again. Subject to, yeah, yes, I'd like the board, and Marcia has a talented way of being able to find all this detail. I'm not familiar with the layout as well as you are.
And certainly also known as rolling numbers. But I'm hoping when I have a digital plan, that would be the perfect. But I can also run downstairs.
Yeah, the key will be the conditions. I've got a copy of the digital plan that he sent.
Signed.
It's it's got some notations, but I don't know if there's more in the record. I'd like to read the minutes, because this is a very kind of complicated access. It's subdivided lot.
Okay.
Because it's surrounded by wetlands.
Okay. Well, I might suggest that,
That might be.
yeah, I might suggest that if John Morse can make it to the next meeting, it would be worthwhile. But other than that, I don't see a point in us sitting down and just talking about
If it's
short-term rental
if
again.
it's just STRs, even with John, I'm not sure I
Yeah.
would want to do a meeting and just say, well, let's talk about it when there's a larger agenda.
And I wouldn't be opposed to that. So unless we get an application, maybe we don't need an October meeting.
Bring it all up in November.
Bring it all up in November.
In the interim, it might be beneficial to pose the question however you wish. I can be your messenger, or maybe we can double team on it as to does the select board wish to consider it as a policy? Because then and we can concentrate on another ordinance.
When do we have
At some point, we don't want to end up knowing that, next April, that, I think we'll change it to a policy after we've invested all our time in it. Right?
Exactly.
So I would feel more comfortable for the board if we can get that clarification.
Is there stuff that we want? Is there ordinance stuff, like we had a list of potential stuff we were interested in working on? Do we want to revisit like what we think are top priority things to do before the next, town hall meeting? and that we would want to work on before then.
I think that might be a helpful thing to do in November too, because we'll be able to, at that point, we will know almost definitely whether or not there's going to be a petition. If there is a petition and it has the correct number of signatures on it, then we will be working with a fairly lengthy cannabis manufacturing facility ordinance, which will originate, well, it already originates, but it'll be going to their attorneys first before it crosses our path. I know the contents of it all. And I know the attorneys that have worked on it. So it's a matter of, everything hinges on that petition. If not, there won't be an ordinance that, unless the select board changed position and want us to create it.
Isn't there a petition already that needs validation? How is it?
I don't know if one is in or not. I want to see it.
I think that's fine.
So if so, if anybody finds out, we should let the whole board know and myself, because then we can begin to set up our timelines. And also I'll be meeting with that person somewhere in the beginning of October. So for your November meeting, I'll have.
I hate to miss a meeting, just, if nothing else, just to check in with John, and you should have your water study by then.
The update on the water study is we had to do a lot of legal documents to protect and to indemnify the community, because we're working on the site is going to be the Knights Pit area. And so we needed to get some site access language. Our town attorney just completed that today. So it's progressing. So I asked the Drummond Environmental when they thought that drilling might be, and they said it would be somewhere between October and next year.
And then, like I said, future facilities committee's report is being finalized. Might or might not have a hearing.
In the Economic Development Committee too, their final report from COG will definitely have a bearing on future work that we might do. Should we find we got a lot of free time, we can work on what COG has recommended for zoning change.
We'll get that in October.
And,
Yeah.
Orion, that was a good point. That was when Matt was chair regarding that list of priorities, and I'm just looking through my emails. I don't remember
Yeah.
what time of year that was that we did that. It was, I chaired the meeting because Matt wasn't here, but it was still when Matt was chair. And, does anybody recall when that was done?
I could go through my emails and see if I could track it, or see if I've got it in a Word document. Because I remember there was a one-page bulleted list that Jenny, Sam, and I prepared when we had called out. A
Yes,
bunch of things on
exactly.
it.
And then we came up with a list and then we submitted that to the select board. And I'd like to pull that up, but I just don't.
How about I check and see if I can find that. If I find it, I can just send it off to Garcia and you can send it up to the board.
So why don't we hold off? We'll plan on having the meeting at this point and see what we can come up with as, if there's anything that we really need to get on the agenda. I am hesitant to not meet if we can actually be productive, but I don't want to meet just to meet.
I think the concerning. It had actually Eric that spoke out what Jenny recommended, this was Smith recommended.
I will say that Wednesday, October 16th is there's another meeting that I may have to attend, and so I might not be able to make that, October 16th board meeting.
Yeah, this is it. This is it. This is the one that I wrote.
I think you collated everything together.
Yeah, right.
I think it'll be real helpful to get clarity from the select board as to what they see are priorities, because they may shift, let's say we do have to handle the cannabis manufacturing facility ordinance. It'll be a healthy 9 to 10 page one with a lot of legalese.
So what was, this was in the, last March, we talked about, that was with the floodplain ordinance, which is done, food truck ordinance, which we tabled, LD 2003, which we do need to tackle.
And that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, kind of merging that with under the big umbrella of affordability.
Right, okay.
The site plan, that was related to site plan updates, that's a big job.
It depends if the board wants to do a complete overhaul, or I have, a simple fix, which, we've been test driving. That's basically involving, all staff to do their homework before the site plan gets to you. So I sit on Bradbury,
Here's the agenda, this is the agenda.
where you can get feedback from your fire chief, your director of public works, myself, and if there's any peer review, have that done in advance of your review. And then that way, if the fire chief found at the meeting, you've got his comments there. Your safety net would be to have that in an ordinance. Or you can create a policy and say, staff, we want your information in writing before our site plan review. So why don't you give that some thought? I'll always be there providing you with a memo on it, but I'd like to see it with the fire chief and Matt, because I think it's helpful. Matt can tell us the best size of a culvert. When Royal River Conservation Trust had their site plan review, and I knew instantly, because but not as good as Matt, that 15-inch culvert was a bit skimpy. And so we had requested a larger size culvert, and it worked. And I think it gives good ammunition to the planners. It makes your jobs much easier to have that support from the staff.
Yeah.
And I like to see it in writing.
So for next month's possible agenda, we could revisit ordinance priorities pending John's being here.
Yep. Yep, that's fair. Yep. That's it, I think.
Just a question, Tom. Does cannabis not fall under agriculture per the state?
Gray area. Gray area. They usually leave it to the municipalities to define agricultural uses, and then in some communities, they call it out as an ag use. I think in our situation, it centers from documentation. It's granted or not granted. Ordinance serve a great purpose of establishing performance standards for other than
More than just.
but know and feel comfortable that we will have a superb model.
I know,
We're prepared.
odor is a big potential issue when it comes to
Yeah.
that stuff. And odor is a tricky thing to also enforce or measure.
Yeah, we always have to be, I always look at being very respectful to code officers because things like noise, unless you've got a decibel reader, you can't measure it. So what's loud to you, I can rarely hear. Okay? What smells to one person smells differently to another. So how do you meter these things? So it's a challenge to code officers that have to enforce. In fact, Jenny and I had that discussion, because you can't enforce her because she doesn't have a decibel reader.
I totally expect.
It doesn't
I-
Yeah.
I recorded the dog next door.
All right, well, I move that we adjourn if nobody has any other questions. All in favor? All right.